All right, everybody, let's go ahead and get started. Once again, my name is Kevin Hancock, Director of Solutions here at Exostar. And thanks for joining me today for Seamless and Secure, using Microsoft Teams to meet CMMC and NIST SP 800-171 compliance. Before I dive into the formal presentation and demonstration, I want to just cover a few housekeeping details. So today's session is scheduled to last 30 minutes. That does include Q&A. Now, you're going to be muted during today's presentation. However, we did receive questions written in as prior to the webinar, and those are the ones that I'll be covering at the end. If for some reason we do have an outage today, just wait for a minute and try to refresh your screen to reconnect. If that doesn't work, you can always use the URL you received via email to come back into the session as well. If at any time you'd like to speak with one of our Exostar managed Microsoft 365 experts, or if you have any additional questions, you can actually reach out to us a couple of different ways. You can email us at managedmicrosoft365@exostar.com, or you can come to our website, www.exostar.com. There's a chat feature there on every page, and we'd be more than happy to answer any questions you have via that medium as well. Now, if one of your questions is about receiving the slide deck or the recording of today's webinar, the answer to those is both yes. So you will receive a copy of today's presentation, as well as a link to the recording as follow-up to today's session. So with that, let me go ahead and dive in. So a large percentage of organizations today want to strengthen their relationship across their supply chain. And the reason they obviously want to do this is to improve customer satisfaction, work more closely together, increase the rate in which innovation can take place by working more closely together. And many of you know Exostar today because you're working with the Exostar network to work and leverage across your supply chain. And what we're going to talk about today is how we can do this in a common environment that many of us are used to in Microsoft Teams and in particular Microsoft 365 and the Teams environment. Now, obviously in the aerospace and defense sector, there are other things we need to think about other than just, okay, well, what's the quickest and easiest way I can collaborate with somebody that's not necessarily in my organization? So I need to be compliant with particular roles, responsibilities, and rules and standards. The ones we'd most hear about in the Department of Defense and the aerospace and defense market is the upcoming requirements around CMMC, the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification Plan, obviously ITAR and the international trade and arms regulations that surround that, and then just the ability to form a trust relationship with that organization that I want to collaborate with. But then obviously we want it to be easy to use. We want to use familiar tools, familiar methods to make it adaptable and adoptable by my organization, and more importantly, those third parties that I actually want to work with. And we want to do this in a compliant and trustful manner. So Exostar offers this in an architecture based on NDISX recommended architecture, that Microsoft typically calls a meet me tenant. Now, many of you may have your own tenants, Microsoft Teams tenants in commercial or GCC High today. You may also be inviting third parties into there. However, it's risky, and a number of the analyst organizations out there have put quite a bit of thought and recommendations around how to ensure that you don't overshare or accidentally share. And many organizations, just to make sure this kind of thing doesn't happen, don't really allow you to share information in your own tenant with external parties. But what Exostar has developed is what we call our managed Microsoft 365 solution. It's based on the architecture that you see here, where you have your own enterprise tenant. But when you want to work with third parties, you establish what's called a Meet Me tenant. And Exostar does this for our customers with our solution that we call Managed Microsoft 365. The idea here is that this Meet Me tenant works, it is what many of us used to call an extranet. It's that walled area where we're going to work securely with those third parties. Exostar is going to act as this identity provider that you see on the left-hand side. Now, we're not using Microsoft's Active Directory. In our case, we're actually using Exostar's Managed Access Gateway. Many of you use this today to reach other supply chain portals that are out there across the defense industry. And that's where you're going to actually do the collaboration piece. Exostar manages those identities of those third parties. It allows you to gather additional information about the organization, and Exostar does the vetting of both the organizations and the individuals that you invite into the tenant. And I'm going to dive into this a little bit deeper just to better explain that solution for you. So what we're bringing together here are really three key components. We're going to use Microsoft's Teams environment up in GCC High. Exostar stands up a standalone tenant for all of our enterprise customers, but we also do this for small and medium-sized businesses as well in a shared tenant. We're going to link this shared tenant with an Exostar application embedded within it, the Exostar's identity management solution, our managed access gateway. That's going to provide the credentialing, the multi-factor authentication to get into it. It's also going to put in particular rules and conventions to ensure that this tenant meets 85 of those 110 NIST 800-171 controls while you and your partners are there within the tenant. It's going to lock down the tenant to a deny by default manner. So only organizations that you explicitly invite in to work with you, and then only individuals that you allow in. And it's going to put some additional functionality around there as well to keep those guardrails in place. So as you want to work with these third parties, you can do so safely and securely. The way the solution is architected is as you see here. So again, you've got Exostar managing this Microsoft Teams tenant. And hopefully most of you know that Microsoft Teams tenant basically is an application that also sits on top of SharePoint. Exostar's solution offers both what we call structured collaboration, where you can set up a folder file structure for those organizations that you collaborate with in kind of a standard way, right? Maybe they're a supplier and I send them RFPs, I send them quality notes, I do things like that. So I've got kind of a standard way to do that. But then we also offer, kind of that ad hoc collaboration where I'm going to establish a team. That team's going to be between me and my partner, or we're going to set it up by project, by product, however I want to set up those team spaces. I'm going to explicitly invite those folks into those, and only those folks will see that that area exists. My compliance boundary is basically going to be everybody's browser, because again, this Exostar application is providing the authentication piece into the tenant. It's also putting some those additional controls around this so people can come into the environment. It puts some additional functionalities or features into the tenant as well, which allows you to do things like block downloads at the team level. Also does things like allows you to create a team mailbox so people can send CUI directly into the tenant without it coming into my corporate boundary. So it does a number of those kinds of things to try and keep the controlled unclassified information, ITAR information, et cetera, around that. Now, the other key component of this solution is Exostar's tech ops and support teams. Those folks are managing this tenant for you. We're the ones who are monitoring it with our SOC and our NOC. Our support folks and our tech ops team that are doing these things are all US citizens here in the US, so it meets those ITAR requirements you have for those environments as well. That's obviously going along with Microsoft's GCC High environment and what they do in the back end as well. So we're providing this fully managed tenant to you. This application that I'm talking about will also allow you, though, to manage the space itself. And I'll cover that as part of the demonstration. So your organization is going to be the one who sets up the teams, invites the users, et cetera. But Exostar is going to manage that environment. And this application that's embedded in there is going to keep those guardrails there in the tenant itself. That structured collaboration that I talked about is an additional functionality that's created by Exostar within the tenant, which overlays a teams and folder structure. So as you bring folks that you're collaborating with in a structured manner, where you've got particular file types that you want to share with them, it allows you to set up that folder file structure, share those files out with them. They get notified when there's a document available for them. They know where to pick it up because it's always in a standard format. And as I mentioned, we also offer that ad hoc collaboration where I can create a team space. I can structure that team space. I can put in additional applications, et cetera, and I can work within that team space with my defined partners for that project product, however I want to organize that. So let me dive into the demonstration because this will better illustrate what this application is doing for you. So as I mentioned, we're here in a Teams environment. So I'm logged in as Adam Spark, and Adam is the what is called the sponsor administrator for a company called Glory Minerals. And Glory Minerals is the Exostar customer. So Adam's managing this environment on behalf of Glory Minerals. He's one of two administrators here in the application for them. And as that administrator, he's the one who gets to, look at users, see if there's, if a user is part of the platform, if they've got roles in particular projects, wants to delete this user because they want to add other users, or because the project has ended with Emma, and so I need to remove her from the space. Adam can also, as I mentioned before, add additional people to be these sponsor administrators. And sponsor administrator is one of those custom roles that's created by this Exostar application to allow you to manage this tenant on behalf of your organization. I can go ahead and add in those third parties that I want to work with. So I can, add another partner to this domain. I simply go in, I type in, at exostar.com, and then I could start to invite people from Exostar if that's one of those partners I want to work with. Now, these people are going to authenticate against Exostar, and Exostar will be the one that manages and keeps up to date that trust relationship, both at that organization level and at that individual level, also including the provisioning of multi-factor authentication to those users, no matter what company they're coming from. It also obviously allows you to delete teams, archive teams, et cetera. So all those kind of admin functions that you expect. Now, we also provide information about the different teams and the different things that are going on within those teams. You have both Teams reports and SharePoint audit reports, and an audit report about the Exostar application itself. So, the audit report about the Exostar app actions This shows me, on a date and time that I want to gather this information from, all the actions that the admins, be they a sponsor admin, we also have the role of a team manager who's going to manage that team space, or just individual members. So what kind of actions took place from those admin type accounts? Which users were added? Which teams were added? What additional functionality or enablements were allowed within that team space? Or if you go to the SharePoint audit report, these are the audit reports about the individual files, right? So I find a particular team, and again, I'm going to choose that 24-hour or other day type range, many days, 30 days. You can choose a range of days or a custom date range, and it's going to return to me all those actions on the individual files that may have taken place within that, or the chats that were uploaded, the conversations, etc. So all of those kinds of actions. But the work itself is going to get done in those different team spaces. So, one of the key things that these sponsor admins will do is go ahead and create teams and invite those individual users. Now, this entire tenant is set up on a deny by default method, so people don't get access to the tenant until they're explicitly invited by Glory Minerals, including the folks from Glory Minerals itself. They then only see those teams which they've been explicitly invited into. So if I need to create a new team, I'm going to create a team called Lenore, select the duration for this team, and I go ahead and create it. Now, once this team is created, the only person right now that has access to this is Adam Spark. But I can also invite other members to take part in that, and I can give them roles to help to then let them manage that team space. So if I go into my list of teams, I choose that team I just selected. I can add users individually or by a delimited list. I'm gonna cut and paste these users into here. I'm gonna look these users up, and these are being looked up in Exostar to determine whether or not they have an account here on, in our Managed Microsoft 365 tenant, or if they're part of the Exostar community already. If they're not, that's okay. Invitations will still go out to them, but they'll register and get proofed by Exostar before they're allowed into the system. Yahoo isn't a domain that's authorized, so if I wanted to allow Yahoo to come in, I go into admin, and I'd bring those, and I allow that domain to be added in, and then we could start to bring in individual users. There are a few users from Glory Minerals. I can bring all these folks in, and I can make those people from Glory Minerals not only members of the team space, but I could also bring them in as a team manager. Now, the team manager role can then manage that team space, this Lenore team that I just set up, without having to come to me, Adam, to do, to add other users, add an application or whatever to that team space. There are some people, who are part of the organizations that already have been in, that we work with, but they're not yet part of this particular tenant. So I can invite these folks. Their invitation is going to have them first, again, go to Exostar, get registered, create their account, do whatever is necessary to set up that multi-factor authentication, and then they'll get access to the tenant. And when they do, they'll have access to this particular team space. Now, what I also did is I sent some information into this team. Right, so we've got this new team here called Lenore. And with this Exostar application, one of the things I had mentioned earlier was it also provides additional features that further allow me to do things within this tenant space, or create additional permissions, if you will. And again, that's done in this Exostar application where we can manage these individual team spaces. So if I look at this Lenore team that I created, one of the things I can do is I can set additional permissions around this team, and I can block downloads from this team space. So, this is a partner that we work with, but we want to work here within the tenant. I don't actually want them to download information from here. They can still see the information, right? You can use your browser. You can open Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and work in those files here within your browser and keep that information locked in here. One of the other things we do is we can create a mailbox for a team. Now, this feature is currently disabled in this particular team because it's still being created in the background. But let me jump to this team, CUI inbox, where I've enabled this particular feature. What this did for CUI inbox, it created a team space, or a team mailbox, I should say. So there's a CUI inbox at this particular domain. And I went into my Exostar email account and I sent some information into this team earlier. This information included some file attachments that I wanted to get into this new Lenore team that once it gets stood up. So I can go ahead and then bring these files in without them coming into my environment, right? I may not want these types of files or this CUI into my corporate boundary. I want to keep it here within a secure enclave. So I'm going to export this to a team space. And in this case, it's going to first go to the CUI inbox team. And then I can move it from that into that Lenore team space. And then, all those people that were just invited would then have access to those individual files. And then that's where they can actually start to work on those. Give us just a second to bring these files in. Now, when these files come in, that's where they're, checked for malware, viruses, ransomware, etc. So you see all these files here. I can go ahead. Some of these images were from my signature block. So I'm just going to go ahead and delete these. I'm going to go ahead and move these files around. This includes the email message itself, since it may also, have some information for the team. I'm going to go ahead and move these over to the Lenore space or places. Here, move it into general. And then these files obviously move from this particular team space into that Lenore team space. And then that's where the work itself is going to get done, right? Only those team members that have access to Lenore are going to see that this team exists. Only, they're the only ones that are going to get access to these files. Now, these may or may not be here. There's always some lag in the actual setup of everything. Sometimes when you move files a little too early, they're still kind of in limbo until the entire space gets set up. But I do have some other projects here or team spaces with files. And then, as I mentioned before, I can keep people here within the browser because we're, the applications, the Microsoft applications themselves are available to users here in the browser. I can make it here, and it's going to allow me to edit this document. I'm going, if I leave it and go back out, come back in, you'll see that I updated this file a few seconds ago. And, and then we're just using basic Teams functionality. But that's a good thing because, people are used to using Teams. They're familiar with it. They're used to the Microsoft productivity tools. But we're keeping it here all in GCC High. We're using this as that collaboration space with our third parties, so we don't have to invite them into our own internal tenant. Now, this particular solution goes along, obviously, with a number of other Exostar applications. We have a number of compliance solutions around CMMC. We have, obviously, the secure collaboration solutions, and then we also have solutions around supply chain management. If you're would like to discuss those in more detail or learn about those things, please come to our website, www.exostar.com. Be more than happy to give you additional information that you need around those. Now, as I mentioned, we did receive some questions before today's session. So number one, is there a special version of Microsoft required in order to be CMMC compliant? It's not really a special version of Microsoft. Now, part of it will be what kind of information you are signing up for. And so which of the different Azure clouds will you need to establish your tenant in? And which of obviously of the Microsoft services do you want to consume? Now, if you are an ITAR organization where you require all the folks to be US citizens in the US around that information, you are going to want a GCC High environment because that is the one that Microsoft is compliant with those particular regulations. Number two, can a corporate computer have access to CUI and also have access to commercial M365 environment? What constitutes control and access? So you can certainly have both, and there are companies that have both commercial and GCC High environments. It's what typically for corporate computers, what they're going to need from whatever Microsoft solution you're using or whatever cloud you're using, you're typically going to want something that manages that laptop, right? Sends it updates, make sure it's up to date on all patches and patching, make sure it's being monitored continuously, etc. When you go to store the information, right, and use OneDrive or things like that, and if it might be CUI, that's typically where you want to start to consider about, well, if I'm storing, processing, or transmitting CUI, then I need to be CMMC compliant with those particular files. Not necessarily the laptop, though, you may be storing those files just on that laptop. So, that where you're going to have to think about what environment it is and where is that information being stored. So we're currently using MS365. What additional requirements must be met to obtain a passing score? So there's a lot of them, right? There are 110 individual controls for NIST 800-171. A number of those are around your IT solutions and the different devices you may use to access that. And typically, these days, your subscription is tied to a number of different Microsoft services that you might be utilizing. And so there's a whole kind of host of things you have to do. Microsoft has a very good thing called the CMMC placemat. It kind of goes through each of the different Microsoft functions that may help you meet that particular control. And then obviously you have to implement that. Number 4, discussion of GCC versus GCC High relative to CMMC compliance. Now, this is really where the main difference is whether or not you can put ITAR information in that particular cloud. I believe that GCC High is the only Microsoft cloud that is compliant with ITAR because that one is, supported and managed by US citizens in the US, so it meets those requirements. I don't believe just GCC does. So I think that's the major difference. So if you don't need that, GCC may be okay for you, but I would obviously check with that, make sure you have the latest updates. All right, everybody. Well, I want to thank you for your time today. Hopefully this was able to answer your questions. If not, please come visit us. We'd be more than happy to answer those via, again, chat on our website, via email, and hope you all have a great rest of the day. Thanks again so much.